I never thought that riding my snow machine across my own property would lead to me becoming the most hated man in Pine Ridge, Montana. But here we are. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January. Pristine white paper with the HOA letterhead printed in navy blue at the top. And I knew before I even opened it that Patricia Winters had something to complain about. My name is Frank Zimmerman, and I have lived in the Pine Ridge Estates development for 3 years now. When I bought my house, a decent 4-bedroom with a 2-acre lot backing up to the National Forest, I thought I had finally found peace. The location was perfect, the house was solid, and the property gave me enough space to actually breathe after spending 15 years cramped in downtown apartments while working as a mechanical engineer for various tech companies. What I did not account for was the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, specifically Patricia Winters. The president, who seemed to believe her role, gave her authority over every blade of grass and snowflake that fell within the development's boundaries. I opened the letter and read through the formal language that basically amounted to a $200 fine for creating unsightly snow machine tracks across my property. According to Section 14.7 of the HOA bylaws, all recreational vehicle usage must be confined to designated pathways and must not create visual disturbances that could negatively impact property values. I read that sentence 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. The tracks they were referring to were from the previous weekend when I had taken my Polaris out for a few runs through the powder on my back acreage. My property. Land that I owned, paid taxes on, and maintained. The tracks were not even visible from the street, and the only way anyone could have seen them was if they had deliberately walked onto my land or used binoculars from an adjacent property. I crumpled the letter and tossed it toward the trash can, missing by a solid 2 feet. My golden retriever, Duke, looked up from his bed near the fireplace with mild interest before going back to sleep. The dog had the right idea. Ignore stupid things and nap. But I could not ignore this. Patricia Winters had been a thorn in my side since I moved in. First, it was my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Then it was my lawn being a 1/4 inch too long during the summer. After that, she complained about my truck being parked in my driveway instead of my garage. Every single complaint came with a formal letter, a citation of some obscure bylaw, and a fine that ranged from $50 to $300. I had paid the first few fines just to avoid conflict. I am not a confrontational person by nature, and after years in corporate environments, I had learned to pick my battles. But this was different. This was not about a mailbox or lawn height. This was about my right to use my own property for legal recreational activities. Montana is snow machine country. Half the people in the state own one, and riding on your own land is about as American as apple pie. I picked up my phone and dialed the HOA office number listed at the bottom of the letter. It rang 4 times before Patricia answered with her clipped professional tone. Pine Ridge Estates HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Frank Zimmerman. I just received your letter about the snow machine tracks. Oh, Frank. Yes, I am glad you called. We need to discuss your compliance with community standards. My compliance? I was riding on my own property, Patricia, property that I own. And as outlined in the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your home, all properties within Pine Ridge Estates must maintain certain aesthetic standards. Snow machine tracks are considered visual pollution. I pinched the bridge of my nose and counted to 5. Visual pollution. You are calling tracks in the snow on private property visual pollution. They can be seen from other properties, Frank. Several residents have complained. Several residents or just you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Multiple residents have expressed concern. The HOA board takes all complaints seriously. Then I would like to attend the next board meeting to discuss this. The next meeting is scheduled for February 15th. You may submit a request to be added to the agenda, but the fine stands regardless. Payment is due within 30 days. I am not paying this fine, Patricia. Her tone shifted, becoming colder. Then you will be assessed additional late fees, and if the matter is not resolved, we can place a lien on your property. I suggest you reconsider. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was angrier than I had been in years. Patricia Winters was threatening to put a lien on my house because of some tracks in the snow that would melt in a few weeks anyway. I needed information. I needed to understand exactly what power the HOA actually had and what my options were. I spent the rest of that day reading through the entire HOA covenant document, all 63 pages of dense legal language. What I found was both disturbing and enlightening. The Pine Ridge Estates HOA had been established in 1998 when the development was first built. The original bylaws were fairly standard for a Montana subdivision of this size, but there had been amendments over the years. Most of those amendments had been pushed through during Patricia Winters' tenure as president, which had started 7 years ago. She had systematically expanded the HOA's authority, adding restrictions on everything from fence heights to approved plant species for landscaping. But here was the interesting part. The HOA did not actually own any common areas. There was no community pool, no clubhouse, no shared amenities. The HOA existed purely as a regulatory body to enforce aesthetic standards. And the heating system for the small HOA office building, which was located at the entrance to the development, was not a separate utility account. According to the county records I pulled up online, the heating system for that building was tied to a centralized boiler system that I had installed and maintained. Let me back up and explain that detail, because it is important. When I moved to Pine Ridge Estates 3 years ago, one of the reasons I chose this particular house was because the previous owner, an old engineer named Robert Chen, had installed a commercial-grade geothermal heating system that was far more efficient than anything else in the area. Robert had been something of a genius, and he had designed the system to not only heat his own home, but also to provide heating to several adjacent properties through underground lines, as a way to offset costs through shared utility payments. When I bought the house, I inherited the system and the maintenance contract. 3 properties paid me a monthly fee for their heating, which helped cover the system's operating costs and gave me a small profit. One of those properties was the HOA office building. Patricia Winters paid me $150 a month for heating, a fraction of what she would pay for electric or propane heat, especially during Montana winters. I had never thought much about this arrangement until now. It was just a bit of extra income and a way to maintain a system that was already in place. But as I sat there looking at the HOA fine letter and thinking about Patricia's threats, an idea began to form. The next morning, I drafted a formal letter of my own. I kept the language professional and cited the specific sections of our heating service agreement. The letter informed Patricia Winters that due to ongoing disputes regarding property usage and HOA overreach, I would be terminating the heating service agreement effective in 30 days, as allowed by the cancellation clause in our contract. I printed the letter, signed it, and drove it directly to the HOA office. Patricia was there, sitting behind her desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and binders labeled with different years and subdivisions. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from neutral to annoyed in about half a second. "Frank, what can I help you with?" I placed the letter on her desk. "I am providing notice that I am canceling our heating service agreement." She picked up the letter and scanned it quickly. "You cannot do this in the middle of winter. The contract says either party can terminate with 30 days' notice. Today is January 23rd. That means the service will end on February 23rd. This is retaliation for the fine. This is a business decision. I have decided that maintaining the heating system for external properties is more work than I want to deal with." Patricia stood up, her face flushing red. "You are putting people's safety at risk. The office needs to remain operational. Then I suggest you arrange for alternative heating. You have 30 days, plenty of time to get propane tanks installed or electric heaters set up." "This is unconscionable, Frank. The board will hear about this." "Good. I will be at the February 15th meeting to discuss my fine. You can bring up the heating then too." I left before she could respond. My heart was pounding, but I felt better than I had in months. For once, I was not just accepting whatever Patricia decided to throw at me. I was pushing back. The next 2 weeks were relatively quiet. I went to work each day at the small engineering firm where I had landed a contract position, came home, took care of Duke, and enjoyed the winter weather. I took my snow machine out twice more, making sure to ride only on my property but not particularly caring if the tracks were visible. Then, on February 7th, I received another letter. This one was not from Patricia but from the entire HOA board. It informed me that my cancellation of the heating service was being contested on the grounds that it constituted a critical service to the community, and that I had a responsibility to maintain it. The letter cited a Montana state law regarding utility service discontinuation and threatened legal action if I proceeded with the cancellation. I read the letter twice and then called my lawyer, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who I had worked with on my house purchase. Sarah was in her mid-40s, practical, and had a reputation for not taking nonsense from anyone. "Frank, good to hear from you. What is going on?" I explained the situation, the snow machine fine, the heating contract, and now the HOA's attempt to force me to continue providing heating. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Send me copies of everything, the HOA bylaws, your heating service contract, and all correspondence. I will review it and get back to you." I emailed everything over that afternoon. Sarah called me back the next morning. "Okay, so here is the situation. The HOA is on shaky ground legally. The law they cited applies to public utilities, not private service agreements between property owners. You have every right to terminate the contract as long as you follow the notice requirements, which you did. However, they could try to make your life difficult in other ways, escalating fines, more scrutiny on your property, that kind of thing. So what do you recommend? Honestly, stand your ground. They are bullying you, and the best way to deal with bullies is to show them you will not back down. But be prepared for this to get messy before it gets better." How messy? Depends on how vindictive Patricia Winters wants to be. As it turned out, Patricia wanted to be very vindictive. Over the next week, I received 3 more fine notices. One for having a trash can visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was in my garage with the door partially open. One for having an unapproved exterior light fixture, which had been on my house since I bought it. And one for allowing Duke to bark excessively, despite the fact that Duke was one of the quietest dogs I had ever owned. Each fine was $200, $600 in total for completely fabricated or exaggerated violations. I documented everything. I took photos, wrote down times and dates, and kept every piece of correspondence. Sarah advised me to pay the fines under protest and file a formal complaint, which I did, but we both knew it was unlikely to result in any immediate change. The board meeting on February 15th fell on a Saturday. It was held in the HOA office, and when I arrived at 10 in the morning, there were already a dozen people there. Patricia sat at the front behind a folding table with 4 other board members, 2 men and 2 women, all in their 50s or 60s. I recognized a few of them from around the neighborhood, but had never had any real interactions with them. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of upcoming landscaping projects. I sat in the back and waited. Finally, Patricia looked at her agenda and said, "We have 2 items submitted by Frank Zimmerman. Frank, you are welcome to come forward and present your concerns." I walked to the front of the room, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I had prepared notes, but I decided to speak from the heart instead. I received a fine for Snowmachine tracks on my own property. Tracks that were not visible from the street and were entirely on land that I own. I have lived here for 3 years, and in that time, I have received more than 20 fines from this HOA, most of them for minor or non-existent violations. This is not about maintaining property values. This is about control and harassment. Patricia cut in. "Frank, the HOA has a responsibility to all residents to maintain community standards. Your repeated violations demonstrate a disregard for those standards." "What violations? Riding a snow machine on my property is not a violation of anything. And the other fines I have received in the past 3 weeks are clearly retaliation for me canceling the heating service contract." One of the other board members, a man named Gerald, spoke up. "The heating contract is a separate issue, Frank. We understand you are upset, but cutting off heat to the office in the middle of winter is extreme. It is a private contract that I have every legal right to terminate. I provided the required notice. If the HOA needs heating, there are other options available." Patricia leaned forward. "You are being unreasonable, Frank. The board has voted to uphold all fines issued to you, and we are formally requesting that you reconsider the heating contract cancellation. And if I do not, then you will continue to face consequences for your violations." I looked at the other board members. 2 of them would not meet my eyes. The other 2 looked like they agreed with Patricia. "Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss," I said and walked out. February 23rd arrived with a cold front that dropped temperatures in Pine Ridge to well below 0. I woke up early, drank my coffee, and at exactly 6 in the morning, I went down to the basement where the main control panel for the geothermal heating system was located. There were 3 zones: my house, the Hendersons' place next door, the Kowalskis on the other side, and the HOA office. I switched off the line to the HOA office and locked the panel. By 9 in the morning, my phone was ringing. I let it go to voicemail. Patricia's voice was tight with anger. "Frank, the office has no heat. This is unacceptable. Call me immediately." I deleted the message and went about my day. I had taken the day off work, anticipating that there might be some drama. I was not disappointed. At around 11, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Patricia standing there with Gerald and another board member, a woman named Susan. Patricia looked furious. Gerald looked uncomfortable. Susan looked cold. "Frank, you need to turn the heat back on," Patricia said without preamble. "The contract expired. I am no longer providing heating services to the HOA office. People are trying to work in there. It is 15 degrees inside. Then I suggest they work from home or install space heaters. This is vindictive and childish." I crossed my arms. "You know what is childish, Patricia?" fining someone for using their own property legally, harassing them with made-up violations, threatening liens and legal action because they will not bow to your authority. You created this situation. Now you get to deal with the consequences. Gerald stepped forward. Frank, look, maybe we can come to some kind of compromise here. What if the board agreed to rescind some of the fines? All of the fines, I said. Every single one I have received in the past 3 years. And a written agreement that the HOA will not interfere with legal recreational activities on my property. Patricia scoffed. Absolutely not. We are not negotiating with someone who is holding us hostage. Then we have nothing to talk about. I started to close the door, but Patricia put her hand out to stop it. You are going to regret this, Frank. Is that a threat? Gerald pulled Patricia back. Come on, Patricia. Let us go figure something else out. They left, and I watched from my window as they trudged back through the snow to the office. I felt a twinge of guilt, but only a twinge. They had pushed me into this corner. I was just using the only leverage I had. Over the next few days, the situation escalated in ways I had not anticipated. The HOA office remained without heat, and Patricia apparently decided to make it everyone's problem. She sent out an email to all Pine Ridge Estates residents, explaining that one of their neighbors was refusing to provide essential heating services, and that this was putting the entire community at risk. She did not name me directly, but it was not hard for people to figure out who she was talking about. My phone started getting calls from neighbors. Some were supportive, saying they were tired of Patricia's overreach and were glad someone was standing up to her. Others were angry, accusing me of being selfish and endangering people. One woman, Mrs. Henderson from next door, actually brought me a casserole and said she hoped I would keep fighting because Patricia had fined her husband for parking their RV in their own driveway for more than 24 hours. But the most troubling call came from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a man's voice said, "You need to turn that heat back on or you are going to have problems." "Who is this?" The line went dead. I reported the call to the police, but there was not much they could do about an anonymous threat. Deputy Martinez, who took my report, suggested I keep my doors locked and call immediately if anything suspicious happened. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me think someone was messing with my property. Duke seemed to sense my anxiety and stayed close, which I appreciated. The next morning, I went outside to find that all 4 of my truck tires had been slashed. I stood there in the driveway, staring at the damage, feeling a cold rage settle over me. This was not Patricia's style. She was passive-aggressive, all letters and fines and formal proceedings. This was something else. I called the police again, and this time Deputy Martinez came out to take a full report. He walked around my truck, took photos, and asked if I had any security cameras. No, I never thought I would need them. You might want to consider it, given what is going on with your HOA situation. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I told him about the threatening phone call. He made a note of it and said they would increase patrols in the area, but without cameras or witnesses, there was not much they could do. I called my insurance company and arranged for a tow truck to take my vehicle to a shop. Then I called Sarah Mitchell and told her what happened. This is getting serious, Frank. If the HOA or Patricia is involved in this, we are talking about criminal activity. I do not think Patricia did this directly, but her email basically painted a target on my back. I am going to send her a cease and desist letter regarding the harassment. And I think we need to consider filing a lawsuit against the HOA for the frivolous fines and the hostile environment they have created. How much is that going to cost me? I will be honest with you, it will not be cheap. but you might be able to recover costs if we can prove harassment and abuse of HOA authority. Think about it and let me know." I spent the rest of that day feeling like I was under siege in my own home. I ordered security cameras online with overnight shipping and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering back to the slashed tires and the threatening call. That evening, Mrs. Henderson came over again, this time without a casserole. Her face was tight with worry. "Frank, I need to tell you something. My husband Tom overheard Patricia talking to someone on the phone yesterday. She was at the office, and Tom was walking by on his way to check the mail. He heard her say something about teaching you a lesson and making sure you understood there were consequences. Did he hear anything else?" "No, but he thought you should know. Patricia has been getting more erratic lately. I think the stress of the office being cold is getting to her, and she is not handling it well. Thanks for telling me. I appreciate it." After Mrs. Henderson left, I sat down and really thought about what I was doing. Part of me wanted to just turn the heat back on and walk away from the whole situation. Pay the fines, keep my head down, and live quietly. But another part of me, the part that had been pushed and bullied and harassed for 3 years, refused to back down. This was not just about me anymore. It was about property rights and the limits of HOA authority and standing up to people who abused power. The security cameras arrived the next day, and I spent several hours installing them around my property. I put one covering the driveway, one on the back acreage where I rode my Snowmachine, and one pointing at the front door. If anyone came onto my property again, I would have video evidence. That night, I got my evidence. At around 2 in the morning, the motion alerts on my phone woke me up. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app. There, on the screen, I could see a figure in dark clothing approaching my truck with what looked like a can of spray paint. I did not think. I just reacted. I threw on my coat and boots and ran outside with my phone already dialing 911. The figure saw me coming and took off running toward the street. I did not chase them. Instead, I walked to my truck and saw that they had managed to spray paint the word "selfish" across the driver's side door before I interrupted them. The police arrived within 10 minutes. This time it was not Deputy Martinez but a sheriff named O'Brien. He looked at the spray paint, reviewed the footage from my camera, and nodded grimly. "We will put out a description, but with the dark clothing and the video quality at night, it will be hard to identify them. But this is good evidence that you are being targeted. I am going to have a patrol car sit on your street tonight, and I want you to keep those cameras running. You think this is related to the HOA situation? I cannot speculate, but it seems like quite a coincidence." The next day, Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting. I received the notice via email at 8 in the morning. The meeting was set for that evening, and the agenda listed one item: discussion of Frank Zimmerman's service cancellation and its impact on the community. I called Sarah and asked if she could attend with me. She cleared her schedule and agreed to meet me there. When we arrived that evening, the HOA office was packed. It seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up, crowding into the small space that was still freezing cold. Patricia and the board sat behind their table, all wearing heavy coats. Several space heaters were running, but they were barely making a dent in the temperature. Patricia called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the ongoing situation with Frank Zimmerman and the heating service. As you all know, Frank has refused to reinstate the heating contract, leaving the office and its staff without adequate climate control during one of the coldest months on record." Sarah stood up before I could respond. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am Mr. Zimmerman's legal counsel. Before we continue, I want to make it clear that my client has not refused anything. He terminated a private contract according to its terms and provided appropriate notice. The HOA's failure to secure alternative heating is not his responsibility. Patricia's face tightened. The contract was for essential services. No, it was a private agreement between two parties. Essential services are provided by public utilities. Mr. Zimmerman is not a utility company. One of the residents in the audience, a man I recognized but did not know by name, stood up. "This is ridiculous. Just turn the heat back on, Frank. You are making all of us look bad." Another voice called out, "He has every right to cancel a contract. The HOA should not have pushed him into this." The room erupted into arguments. Some people were on my side, others on Patricia's. Sarah sat down and whispered to me, "Let them fight it out. This is actually good for us. It shows the community is divided, which undermines any claim that you are acting against everyone's interests." Patricia banged a gavel on the table. "Order. We need order. The board has discussed this situation extensively, and we have decided to offer a compromise. If Frank agrees to reinstate the heating contract, the board will rescind the fine related to the Snowmachine tracks." "What about the other fines?" I asked. "The other fines were for legitimate violations and will stand." Sarah stood again. "That is not acceptable. My client has been subjected to systematic harassment by this HOA, including fines for non-existent or trivial violations. Additionally, Mr. Zimmerman's property has been vandalized twice in the past week, and we believe this is directly related to the hostile environment created by the HOA's actions." Patricia's eyes widened. "You are accusing the board of vandalism. I am stating facts." "My client's truck was vandalized. He received threatening phone calls, and all of this occurred after your email to the community, which essentially painted him as a villain. Whether you intended it or not, you created a situation where some residents felt justified in taking action against him." The room went quiet. Gerald, the board member who had seemed reasonable before, spoke up. "Patricia, maybe we should consider rescinding all the recent fines. This has gotten out of hand." Patricia shook her head. "The fines were issued according to the bylaws. We cannot just ignore violations." "What violations?" I said, standing up. "A trash can in my garage, a light fixture that was there when I bought the house, my dog barking when he barely makes a sound. You made those up to punish me for standing up to you." "That is not true," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Susan, the other board member who had been relatively quiet, spoke up. "Patricia, I have to agree with Gerald. I have reviewed the recent fines and they do seem excessive. Maybe we should take another look at them." Patricia looked around the table and realized she was losing support. "Fine. The board will review all fines issued to Mr. Zimmerman in the past 3 months and make a determination at our next regular meeting." "When is that?" Sarah asked. "March 15th. "That is a month away. Not acceptable. The board can meet next week to review this." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Gerald nodded. "We can do an emergency meeting next week. How about February 28th? Sarah looked at me, and I nodded. "That works." The meeting broke up shortly after that, with clusters of people standing around talking. A few neighbors came up to me and expressed support. One man, who introduced himself as Bill Thompson, said he had been planning to move because he was tired of the HOA's constant interference. Another woman, younger, maybe in her 30s, said she was glad someone was finally pushing back because her family had been fined 3 times in the past year for things like having Christmas lights up too late and parking a work van in their driveway. "As Sarah and I walked back to my house," she said, "that went better than I expected. Patricia is losing control of the board. If we can get them to rescind the fines, you will have significant leverage. And if they do not..." Then we file a lawsuit and let a judge sort it out. But I think they will fold. They do not want the publicity or the legal fees. The week leading up to the February 28th meeting was tense, but quiet. No more vandalism occurred, though I kept the cameras running and the police continued their patrols. I also received a letter from Patricia informing me that if I did not reinstate the heating by March 1st, the HOA would seek legal action to compel me to do so. Sarah responded with a letter of her own, reiterating that I had no legal obligation to provide heating and that any attempt to force me to do so would be met with a countersuit for harassment. On February 28th, I arrived at the HOA office with Sarah to find the board in session, but looking decidedly less confident than they had at the previous meeting. The room was still cold, and Patricia looked exhausted. I wondered if she had been working in the freezing office or if the stress of the situation was getting to her. Gerald called the meeting to order. We have reviewed all fines issued to Frank Zimmerman in the past 3 months. After careful consideration, the board has voted to rescind 5 of the 6 fines. Which one are you keeping? Sarah asked. The fine for the Snowmachine tracks, Patricia said. That was the original violation that started this situation, and it was a legitimate concern raised by multiple residents. I want the names of those residents, I said. Patricia hesitated. That information is confidential. No, it is not, Sarah said. If residents are filing complaints that result in fines, the accused party has a right to know who is making those complaints. Otherwise, it is too easy for board members to claim support that does not exist. Gerald looked uncomfortable. Patricia, she is right. We should disclose the complainants. Patricia pulled out a file and flipped through it. The complaints came from Susan Marsh and Robert Kellerman. I looked at Susan, the board member. She looked away. You filed a complaint about my Snowmachine tracks. Susan cleared her throat. I did express concern about the visual impact, yes. Have you ever even been on my property to see the tracks? I saw them from the road. My back acreage is not visible from the road. You would have to trespass to see those tracks. Susan's face went red. Gerald looked at Patricia. Is that true? Patricia shuffled papers. The point is that the tracks were visible and were considered a violation. The point is that your board member trespassed on my property to find something to complain about, I said. That is not enforcement of community standards. That is harassment. Sarah leaned forward. Here is what is going to happen. The board is going to rescind all fines issued to Mr. Zimmerman, including the Snowmachine fine. In return, Mr. Zimmerman will agree to reinstate the heating contract, but at a revised rate that reflects the market value of such services and the hassle of this entire situation. The new rate will be $300 per month, double the current rate. Patricia stood up. That is extortion. No, that is business. You can accept the offer or find alternative heating. Your choice. The board members looked at each other. Finally, Gerald said, Can we have a few minutes to discuss this privately? Sarah nodded, and we stepped outside. The cold air felt good after the stuffy tension inside. Sarah turned to me. I think they will take the deal. Patricia is losing control and the other board members know it. What if they do not? Then you keep the heat off, and they either freeze or pay to install a new system. Either way, you win. 10 minutes later, Gerald came out and asked us to come back in. The board was seated and Patricia looked like she had been crying. Gerald spoke. The board has voted to accept the terms. All fines against Frank Zimmerman are rescinded, and we agree to the revised heating contract rate of $300 per month. I want it in writing, I said. A formal agreement signed by all board members. We can have that prepared by the end of the week, Gerald said. I nodded. Once I have the signed agreement and the first payment at the new rate, I will reinstate the heating." Patricia stood up abruptly and left the room. Susan followed her. The other two board members, Gerald and a man named Tom who had barely spoken during any of the meetings, looked relieved that it was over. As Sarah and I walked out, she said, "Congratulations. You just went toe-to-toe with an HOA and won. It does not feel like winning. It feels exhausting." "That is because it was. But you stood your ground and you protected your rights. That matters." The formal agreement arrived 3 days later via certified mail. It was signed by all board members, including Patricia, though her signature looked angry, if such a thing is possible. The next day, I received a check for $300. I deposited it, went down to my basement, and turned the heating line back on for the HOA office. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received notice that Patricia Winters had resigned as HOA president, citing health reasons. Gerald took over as interim president, and one of the first things he did was announce a review of all HOA bylaws with an eye toward reducing restrictions and focusing on genuine community needs, rather than aesthetic micromanagement. But the real shock came when I received a call from Deputy Martinez. "Frank, I wanted to let you know that we made an arrest in the vandalism case." "Seriously? Who was it?" "A man named Robert Kellerman. He confessed to slashing your tires and spray painting your truck." Turns out he is Patricia Winters' brother-in-law and was acting on what he believed were her wishes, though we have no evidence that she directly asked him to do it. I sat down, processing this information. What is going to happen to him? He is being charged with criminal mischief and vandalism. Given that it is his first offense and he cooperated once we brought him in, he will probably get probation and restitution. But I thought you would want to know. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking about the entire situation. Patricia had been so convinced that she was right, so certain that her authority was absolute, that she had created an environment where her own family felt justified in committing crimes on her behalf. It was sad, in a way. Over the next few months, things in Pine Ridge Estates slowly returned to normal. Gerald proved to be a reasonable and fair HOA president. The board did revise the bylaws, removing many of the more restrictive provisions and establishing clearer procedures for complaints and fines. I continued providing heating to the HOA office at the new rate and never had another issue with them. Patricia Winters moved away in April. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had taken a job in Billings and wanted a fresh start. I did not wish her ill. I just hoped she learned something from the experience. As for me, I kept riding my Snowmachine on my property whenever I wanted. I never received another fine or complaint. Duke and I settled into a comfortable routine, and for the first time since moving to Pine Ridge Estates, I felt like I was actually living on my own terms. The lawsuit against Robert Kellerman for the vandalism moved through the courts, and in June, I received a restitution check that covered all of my expenses related to the tire replacement and truck repairs. Kellerman also wrote me an apology letter, which I appreciated, though I did not respond to it. Some things are better left in the past. One warm evening in late June, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sun set over the mountains when Mrs. Henderson walked over with her husband Tom. They were holding hands and smiling. "Frank, we wanted to thank you," Mrs. Henderson said. "For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. After you fought back, a lot of us realized we did not have to just accept every ridiculous rule she came up with. Gerald has been great, and the neighborhood feels like an actual community now instead of a police state." Tom nodded. "And we wanted to give you this." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a gift card to a local restaurant and a card signed by more than 30 neighbors thanking me for my courage in standing up for property rights. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "You did not have to do this." "Yes, we did," Mrs. Henderson said. "You made a difference, Frank." "That matters." After they left, I sat there with Duke at my feet and looked at the card. I thought about everything that had happened, the stress and the anger and the fear. But I also thought about the outcome. The HOA was better. The community was stronger. And I had proven to myself that I would not be pushed around. That night, I took my snow machine out for a long ride across my property. The snow was long gone, replaced by summer grass and wildflowers, but I did not care. I rode through the meadow and up to the edge of the national forest, and I felt free. The HOA never bothered me again. Gerald served as president for 2 more years before stepping down and being replaced by a younger couple who were even more committed to minimal interference in residents' lives. The heating contract continued without issue, and I eventually used some of the extra income to upgrade Duke's dog house and build a proper shop for my snow machine and other equipment. I learned a lot from that winter. I learned that HOAs can be forces for good when run by reasonable people, but they can also be tools of tyranny when run by those who crave control. I learned that standing up for yourself is hard and sometimes scary, but almost always worth it. And I learned that communities are stronger when people are willing to speak up against injustice, even when it is easier to stay silent. Years later, I am still in Pine Ridge Estates. My house is paid off. Duke has been joined by a second golden retriever named Bella, and I have never been happier. I still ride my snow machine every winter, leaving tracks across my property without a care in the world. And when new residents move in and ask about the HOA, I tell them the story of Patricia Winters and the winter when I shut off the heat. Most of them laugh and say they are glad those days are over. A few ask if I would do it again. I always answer the same way. I hope I never have to, but if I needed to, I absolutely would. Because at the end of the day, your property is yours. Your rights matter. And no HOA, no matter how official they look or how many bylaws they cite, has the authority to take that away from you without a fight. The last I heard about Patricia Winters was from an old colleague of mine who ran into her at a conference in Billings. According to him, she had completely changed careers and was working in administrative support for a small nonprofit. She seemed happier and less stressed. He mentioned that she asked about Pine Ridge Estates and seemed genuinely remorseful about how things had ended. I never reached out to her. Some bridges are better left burned, but I hope she found peace, just as I found mine. These days, when winter comes and the first snow falls, I make sure to take my snow machine out early. I ride across my 2 acres, making fresh tracks in the pristine white powder. Sometimes neighbors wave as I pass by. Sometimes kids stop to watch and ask questions about the machine, and every single time, I remember that this is what freedom looks like. The freedom to use your property as you see fit within the bounds of the law. The freedom to stand up to those who would abuse authority. The freedom to live your life without fear of petty tyrants hiding behind official titles and stacks of bylaws. The HOA office still stands at the entrance to Pine Ridge Estates. Gerald and his successors have turned it into more of a community resource than an enforcement headquarters. They host neighborhood gatherings there, keep a bulletin board with local information, and maintain a small library of books that residents can borrow. The heating system I installed still runs smoothly, providing warmth through the harsh Montana winters. I do the maintenance twice a year, and the HOA pays their bill on time every month. It is a functional relationship based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Last winter, A new family moved in across the street. They had a son about 12 years old who was fascinated by snow machines. His name was Kyle, and he reminded me a lot of myself at that age, curious about mechanical things and eager to learn. One Saturday, I invited Kyle and his father over to look at my Polaris. I showed them how the engine worked, let Kyle sit on it, and told them about the trails up near the national forest. His father thanked me and mentioned that they were nervous about the HOA after hearing stories about some neighborhoods. "Not here," I told him. "Not anymore. Just follow the basic rules, be a good neighbor, and you will be fine. And if anyone tries to give you grief about something unreasonable, you let me know." Kyle's father smiled. "I heard you had something to do with that. The realtor mentioned there was a situation a few years back that resulted in some changes." A situation. That is one way to put it. Well, whatever happened, we are grateful. This place feels like a real community, not just a collection of houses. That comment stuck with me for days. A real community. That is what we had built or rebuilt in the aftermath of the conflict with Patricia. It had taken a crisis to get there, but we had come out stronger on the other side. I think about that conversation whenever I feel frustrated with bureaucracy or rules that do not make sense. Change is possible, but it requires people willing to take a stand, even when it is uncomfortable or risky. It requires being willing to use whatever leverage you have, whether that is a heating contract or a lawsuit or simply the courage to say no. The scars from that winter are long healed. My truck has been repainted. The cameras I installed have caught nothing more interesting than deer wandering through my yard. The legal documents from the case are filed away in a drawer I rarely open, but the lessons remain. I am more confident now, more willing to speak up when something does not sit right. I pay attention to HOA communications and attend meetings when important issues are on the agenda. I have even served on a couple of committees, helping to draft new policies that balance community needs with individual freedom. And most importantly, I have never forgotten what it feels like to be pushed to the breaking point. That empathy has made me a better neighbor. When I see someone struggling with the HOA or getting fined for something trivial, I reach out. I share my story. I offer support and advice. Sometimes just knowing that someone else has been through it and survived is enough to give people the courage to stand up for themselves. Last month, the HOA held its annual meeting, and during the open forum portion, a young woman stood up and complained about being fined for having her child's toys visible in the front yard. It was a minor issue, but the way she described it reminded me so much of my own experience with Patricia. I stood up and spoke in her defense. I reminded the board and the assembled residents that we had learned years ago that excessive enforcement of minor aesthetic issues creates resentment and divides communities, rather than strengthening them. I suggested that the fine be rescinded, and that the board consider whether the rule in question served any genuine purpose. The current board president, a woman named Lisa Monroe who had moved to the development after the Patricia era, listened carefully and then called for a vote. The fine was rescinded unanimously, and the board agreed to review the rule at their next meeting. After the meeting, the young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you so much. I felt so helpless." "I know the feeling," I told her, "but you are not helpless. None of us are. As long as we are willing to speak up and support each other, the HOA works for us, not the other way around." She hugged me, and as I drove home that night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight I had waged years ago had not just been about me or my right to ride a snow machine. It had been about setting a precedent, about establishing that residents had power and rights that could not be trampled on by overzealous board members. That precedent was holding strong. The culture of the HOA had genuinely changed, and it showed in everything from how meetings were conducted to how complaints were handled to how residents interacted with each other. I pulled into my driveway and saw Duke and Bella waiting for me at the window. Inside, the house was warm and comfortable, heated by the same geothermal system that had been at the center of so much drama. I made dinner, took the dogs for a walk, and settled in for a quiet evening. As I sat there in my living room, I looked at the photos on the wall. My parents, who had passed years ago but would have been proud of me for standing up for myself. Friends from college and old jobs. Duke as a puppy. The Montana landscape that I loved so much. This was home. Not just the house, but the community, the land, the life I had built here. And I had fought for it. I had refused to be driven away or beaten down by someone who thought title and authority were more important than fairness and respect. The phone rang, breaking me out of my reverie. It was Sarah Mitchell. "Frank, I am calling with some interesting news. Remember Robert Kellerman, Patricia's brother-in-law who vandalized your truck?" "Of course." "He completed his probation and community service, and apparently he has been telling his story as part of anger management counseling. His therapist contacted me because Robert wanted to know if you would be willing to meet with him. It is part of his recovery process, making genuine amends." I thought about it. "What do you think?" "It is completely up to you. No pressure either way. But I will say that people can change, and sometimes giving them that opportunity is good for everyone involved. Tell him I will meet with him. Coffee somewhere public. I will set it up." The meeting happened 2 weeks later at a coffee shop in downtown Pine Ridge. Robert Kellerman looked different than I remembered from the brief glimpse I had gotten of him during the court proceedings. He was thinner, with gray in his hair, and he carried himself with a kind of weariness that spoke of genuine regret. We shook hands awkwardly and sat down with our coffee. Robert started talking immediately, as if he had been holding the words in for too long. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need to apologize for what I did. I let my sister-in-law convince me that you were the enemy, that you were trying to destroy the neighborhood. I did not think about the fact that you were a person with rights and feelings. I just acted out of anger and stupidity." I listened, letting him finish. "I have been in therapy, and I have learned a lot about myself, about how I let other people's opinions influence my actions, about how I need to think for myself and stand up for what is right, not just go along with what family or friends want. What I did was wrong, and I am truly sorry." "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "What you did hurt me and scared me. But I also understand that you were caught up in a situation that brought out the worst in a lot of people. That is generous of you to say. It is also true. Patricia created a toxic environment and you were one of the casualties, but so were a lot of other people. The difference is you have the courage to own up to your mistakes and make amends. That says something." We talked for another hour. Robert told me about his life, his struggles with anger, his relationship with Patricia, and how it had become strained after everything that happened. I told him about the changes in the HOA and how the community had healed. When we finally stood to leave, Robert shook my hand again. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I do not deserve it, but I am grateful." "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right," I said. "Just do not waste it." As I drove home, I thought about forgiveness and redemption. Robert had made serious mistakes, but he was trying to be better. That was all anyone could ask. The years continued to pass peacefully. I advanced in my engineering career, eventually becoming a full partner at the firm where I worked. Duke passed away at the age of 13, and I mourned him deeply, before eventually adopting Bella's puppy from her litter with a neighbor's golden retriever. The cycle of life continued, Pine Ridge estates evolved as well. New families moved in. Old residents moved on. The housing market fluctuated. But through it all, the HOA remained stable and reasonable, a testament to the reforms that had been implemented in the wake of the Patricia Winters era. I became something of a local legend, though I never sought that status. New residents would hear the story of the heating contract and the Snowmachine fines, usually embellished with details that were not quite accurate but made for a better tale. I did not mind. If my story helped people understand their rights and encouraged them to stand up against unreasonable authority, then the embellishments were fine by me. On the 5th anniversary of the day I shut off the heat to the HOA office, a group of neighbors threw me a surprise party. They presented me with a plaque that read, "To Frank Zimmerman, who taught us that property rights matter and that standing up for yourself is never wrong, with gratitude from the residents of Pine Ridge Estates." I was genuinely touched. I gave a short speech, thanking everyone and emphasizing that the real heroes were the people who had supported me, who had spoken up at meetings, who had voted for reasonable board members and pushed for fair policies. "What I did was defend my rights," I said. "But what all of you did was build a better community. That is the real victory." The party lasted well into the evening. People shared their own stories of HOA struggles and triumphs. Kids played in the yard. Dogs chased each other around. It felt like a genuine celebration of what a neighborhood could be when people worked together and respected each other. As I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, some I knew well and others I was just getting to know, I felt a profound sense of belonging. This was my home, these were my people, and we had all fought in our own ways to make it a place worth living. The night ended with a bonfire in my backyard. Someone had brought a guitar, and we sang old folk songs and told stories. The Montana sky was clear and full of stars. The air was crisp but not cold. Everything felt perfect. When the last guests finally left around midnight, I sat alone by the dying fire with my current dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, and reflected on the journey. It had been 5 years since I had taken the drastic step of shutting off the heat to the HOA office. 5 years since I had stood my ground against what I believed was unjust authority. In that time, I had seen an entire community transform. I had made genuine friends. I had learned to use my voice and my leverage to create positive change, and I had never once regretted my decision to fight back. Sure, there had been scary moments. The vandalism, the threats, the uncertainty of not knowing how it would all turn out. But I had survived those moments and come out stronger. I poked at the fire, sending sparks up into the night sky. Daisy sighed contentedly at my feet. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear an owl calling. Life was good. The next morning, I woke early and decided to take my snow machine out. It was late November, and we had just gotten our first real snowfall of the season. The conditions were perfect. I loaded the Polaris onto my trailer, drove up to the National Forest access point, and spent the day riding through fresh powder. The landscape was pristine and beautiful, unmarked except for animal tracks and the path I carved through the snow. This was freedom. This was why I lived in Montana. This was why I had fought so hard to protect my rights. As I rode, I thought about all the people over the years who had told me to just pay the fine, to not make waves, to accept the HOA's authority. I thought about how different my life would be if I had listened to them. I would probably still be living in Pine Ridge Estates, but I would be miserable. I would be constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what minor infraction would trigger the next fine. I would be resentful and frustrated, living on my own property but never feeling truly free. Instead, I had taken a stand. And in doing so, I had not only secured my own freedom, but had helped create positive change for an entire community. The sun was setting as I loaded my snow machine back onto the trailer. I was exhausted but exhilarated. I drove home slowly, enjoying the twilight and the feeling of accomplishment. Back at my house, I unloaded the snow machine and put it away in my shop. I fed Daisy and made myself dinner. As I ate, I pulled up my email and found a message from Gerald, the former HOA president who had helped mediate the resolution of my conflict with Patricia. The email was brief, but meaningful. Gerald was writing to let me know that he was moving to Arizona for retirement. He wanted to thank me one more time for having the courage to challenge the HOA's overreach, because it had led to reforms that made his time as president much more pleasant and productive. "You changed this place for the better, Frank," he wrote. "Never doubt that." I replied with my own thanks and well wishes for his retirement. Then I sat back and smiled. It was nice to be appreciated, but more than that, it was satisfying to know that the changes had lasted, that they were not just temporary fixes but genuine improvements to how the community operated. That night, I slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that I had made the right choices and that my home was truly mine. The winter passed peacefully. I rode my snow machine whenever I wanted, leaving tracks across my property without worry. The HOA operated smoothly under competent leadership. The heating contract continued without incident, providing me with reliable income and the HOA with affordable warmth. Spring came, and with it the annual HOA elections. I was nominated for a board position by several neighbors, but I declined. I had no interest in being part of the administration. I was content to be a watchdog, someone who paid attention and spoke up when necessary, but otherwise let others handle the day-to-day governance. The new board was elected, and they were all reasonable people committed to maintaining the balanced approach that had been established. I attended the first meeting and felt confident that the community was in good hands. As I drove home from that meeting, I thought about how far we had all come. From a neighborhood ruled by fear and excessive regulation to a true community where people looked out for each other and respected individual rights. It had taken a crisis to get there, but we had made it. I pulled into my driveway and saw Daisy waiting at the window. Inside, my house was warm and comfortable. Outside, the Montana landscape stretched out in all its beauty. This was exactly where I was supposed to be, and if anyone ever tried to take that away from me again, I knew exactly what I would do. I would stand my ground, use whatever leverage I had, and fight for what was right. Because that is what you do when something matters. You do not back down, you do not give in, you stand up and you fight. The HOA had learned that lesson the hard way. And I had learned that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. As I settled into my favorite chair with Daisy at my feet, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life was good, home was secure, and the future was bright. That is the story of how I shut off the heat and watched them panic. But more than that, it is the story of how a community found its way back to fairness and respect. It is a story about property rights, personal courage, and the power of standing up for what you believe in. And it is a story that continues to this day, every time a new resident moves in and hears the tale. Every time someone at an HOA meeting questions an unreasonable rule. Every time a neighbor supports another neighbor against unjust authority, the fight I fought was not just for me. It was for everyone who believes that your home should be your castle, that property rights matter, and that no organization, no matter how official it seems, has the right to abuse its power. That is my legacy in Pine Ridge Estates. Not the conflict itself, but the positive changes that came from it, and I am proud of that. proud of standing up, proud of fighting back, proud of making a difference, because at the end of the day, that is what matters, not the fines or the threats or the cold offices, but the community we built together, one where people are free to live their lives without fear of petty tyranny. And every time I take my snow machine out and carve fresh tracks through the Montana snow, I remember what I fought for and why it mattered. And I smile, knowing that I would do it all again in a heartbeat.